Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to 30 on Thursdays, our bi-weekly webinar series about everything and anything having to do with SharePoint. I'm going to jump into while people are still logging in to GoToMeeting, I'm going to jump into a little bit of housekeeping. For those of you joining us the first time, 30 on Thursdays, as I said, is a bi-weekly 30-minute webinar series where we cover a variety of topics related to SharePoint, all different versions of SharePoint, how you can use SharePoint. Our next webinar is coming up on Thursday, February 21st. This is where we're going to get into some SharePoint 2013. We're going to do building charts with Power View and with SharePoint 2013 and Excel 2013. And you can get our full schedule of upcoming webinars at www.suskitech.com/webinars. And on that point, I just want to do a quick poll. So I'm going to go ahead and post this poll and leave it out there for about 30 seconds for you to answer. As we're planning out our schedule, I'm interested in seeing if you're interested in seeing more 2010 related topics, more 2013 related topics, or a nice balance of the two, maybe one a month on 2013, one a month on SharePoint 2010, just to gauge the programming as we get into late Q1 and into Q2 and Q3. So I'll let that sit out there for a little bit. If you could go ahead and answer that, I would appreciate it. And I'll give it another couple seconds.
Gee, Steve, I can't vote.
Oh, you probably can't vote because you're a panelist.
I know. No one's going to listen to me.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and close it up, and we'll move forward to our next slide. So today's session is being recorded. For if anybody joins us late or you have to duck out early, it'll be available on our website in the archived webinars section. Questions, use the window at the right, typically on the right of everybody's screen. There's a question window. We'll save it all till the end, and we'll ask Mark all the questions. We have a couple of other online courses coming up. These are more formalized training classes that we offer in a similar format. They're 3 hours in length, and they cover a topic related to SharePoint. Coming up in February, we have advanced InfoPath forms, where we'll talk about how to use InfoPath forms, some of the integration with the InfoPath Designer and SharePoint Designer, and some different things you can do with InfoPath. And then related to the topic we have here today, using jQuery in SharePoint 2010, we'll be doing a webinar in March. And you can get all that information on our website. We also have a bunch of recordings available. You can get those on our website as well. These are in that 3-hour format that you can get. Covers a broad range of topics, from design topics to document management topics to search to developer topics. So without further ado, I want to jump into today's session, which is top 10 jQuery uses in SharePoint 2010. I'm Steve Witt from SuskieTech/Protiviti. I will be your moderator today, and with us a very special guest, Marc Anderson, SharePoint MVP, and a name that has become synonymous with jQuery, is going to be our presenter and take us through our top 10 list. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Marc, and we'll get started.
Thanks, Steve. Let's hope we can push the buttons right here, at least that I can push the buttons right. There we go. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, I am. Looks good.
And that's the wrong slide deck. There we go. How about now? Still good?
Yep, says let's get started.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. So what is jQuery? I'm not going to read this, but I found it interesting because the description for this webinar put it one way, which is sort of focused on some of the sort of UI components like navigation, tabs, image rotators, things like that. And then I took this other description, of course make these slides available. This other description is what's on jQuery's site, and it's a little more techy and a little more sort of developer focused. So I think that one of the things that is true about jQuery, just like with SharePoint, is that it's a dessert topping and it's a floor wax. It does a lot of different things. I'm saying that because probably my top 10 list is going to be different than some other people's, but based on my experience working with jQuery, with SharePoint, and what I like to do, what I find is really useful, I thought I'd put together my top 10 list and see how well it meshes up with what other people think. The first thing, of course, you have to do is add jQuery or jQueryUI or SP services, whatever plugins, libraries, and things that you are going to use into your either master page, individual pages, content editor, web parts, whatever. And I just included this slide as a quick sort of cheating way to drop in the references that you might need to use most of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today. And there's a link at the bottom of most of these slides for more detail on a reference page somewhere. So here, without any more ado, here's my top 10 list, going, of course, in David Letterman style from 10 down to 1. The first thing that, and it sort of goes from the least complex to the most complex, and again, it's my list, so it may or may not match yours, but let's see what you think. So the first thing is simple text changes. There are a lot of things in SharePoint that are worded oddly, and you can do a very simple thing like this one line of jQuery that will take this "I like it" tag that's up in the upper right of all the SharePoint 2010 pages and convert it to like this. Now, I know that that's a sort of silly little example, but by dropping that one line of jQuery into your master page, you would be changing that wording on every single page in your site collection or in your farm, depending on how you have things configured. So rather than going through all of the effort of deploying managed code solutions to do something as minor as that, jQuery is great for sort of the little band-aids and sort of fixing the tiny little stuff about SharePoint that drives some people nuts. The things that are a lot more difficult to change when you have to override an existing class and things like that. So that's my number 10, which is just quick band-aidy kind of things like text changes. Number 9 is adding branding effects. CSS is the way we ought to do most branding, but there are a lot of things around sort of modern branding thinking that also add behaviors. And so you can't do all of that with CSS, though we can do a lot more with CSS3 these days. But when you add a little bit of script to it, to your branding, and it could be plain JavaScript, and it could be, of course, jQuery, which is just a JavaScript library, you can actually start to change the behavior of things like forms. This is a little snapshot of a demo that I've had out there forever. It's actually on SharePoint 2007. That's what that link will take you to. And it just takes a standard list form and changes the checkboxes and radio buttons into something that look quite different. And there's some script there, some jQuery that actually makes that happen. And it's sort of checking the boxes or clicking the radio buttons that are off screen and sort of transferring the behavior of the user from what you see to what needs to be clicked in order for the form to work. So, making your branding more than just the look and feel, more than just a surface thing. It's actually adding some behavior, and jQuery is just fantastic for that. Number 8, adding new behavior to existing controls. This is an example of what I think of as ghost text, and it's just the simple stuff that you see a lot. You actually see it in the search box in SharePoint 2010 out of the box, where you might put some text into a field that you want somebody to enter data into, and then when they click into that field, that text goes away and they can type whatever they want. There's some debate in the user interface sort of community around whether this ghost text kind of thing is actually a good approach or not, but I know that a lot of the clients that I work with, a lot of the users actually like it and they request it. So with jQuery, you can do something with, again, just a very few lines, 4 lines, depending on how you space it out here, that will take care of that behavior for you and make the existing controls in SharePoint do a little bit more than what your users are used to. Maybe help them understand how to interact with a form better, or help them understand how better to navigate between pages, just to add a little bit more zip, a little bit more customization to the behavior of those controls. And again, rather than writing a whole new field control that might do something or override the existing field controls using server-side code, very little JavaScript that you can just drop into the page. jQuery, JavaScript, same thing. Number 8, oh, this one went backwards. Rearrange DOM elements. We start with what is on the left there with the customer type, and a sort of big pile of options there. lots of times SharePoint's out-of-the-box UI arranges things in rather strange ways. It doesn't meet all of the use cases that you might run into because SharePoint is a platform which your users can expand on. You can you can do quite a bit of customization by adding lists and adding values to lists and adding content to lists. You may end up with some UI artifacts from all of that don't really come out all that pleasing. The big pile of radio buttons or checkboxes is one very good example of that. If you have a survey that has a lot of choices, or in this case, just a piece of metadata that you want someone to make a choice from a big long list, it gets pretty ugly pretty fast. There's a function that I have in SP Services, my jQuery library that works with SharePoint, that helps you to rearrange those DOM elements so that you get things either more compact or you use the screen real estate a little bit better than SharePoint does out of the box. Again, it's sort of a basic example, but you can see that you can move things around in the page without changing any of the underlying capability of SharePoint. You just make that UI work a lot better by taking elements in the DOM, and the DOM is the document object model. Essentially, you can think of a web page as a bunch of data that your browser renders for you, and that data comes in the form of HTML, which is a flavor of XML, which is really data. So you can manipulate the data that is in the browser, that's the document object model, and change the way things are arranged or how they look to the user. And there's a lot of JavaScript actually that is part of SharePoint itself that does very similar things like the menu drop-downs, the edit control blocks that are on the items in a list, and the normal views and things like that. Excuse me, those are all script-driven as well. So that's number 7. Number 6, jQueryUI is a great companion library to jQuery, and it sort of does the name should give you a pretty good handle. jQuery is a lot more of the plumbing, and jQueryUI takes those plumbing capabilities and gives you a lot of user interface widgets or elements that you can take advantage of. And there are things like the first one that's on the screen here is an accordion effect. So if you clicked on section 2, it would close up section 1 and show you the content for section 2. You're starting to see that. Well, it's been around for quite a while. You see that a lot on sites out on the web at large, and it's a great thing to be able to use screen real estate in SharePoint much more effectively. You can do things with tabs. This is just again a picture of the out-of-the-box jQueryUI tabs demo function, where you can take content and sort of squish it up into tabs to take a better advantage of the space you have on the screen. Christophe Humbert has a great tool called Easy Tabs that a lot of people have been using for years, going back to early SharePoint 2007, I think, to do this by compressing web part zones. But you can use jQueryUI's tabs to do things in a slightly different way and maybe make it a little bit more data-driven from underlying list data and things like that. Here's an example of some sliders. This is a simple color picker where you actually slide those little sliders from left to right, and you end up with a different color. I got orange in the mixture that I was playing around with for the screenshot. So those sliders can be used to drive all sorts of things. I recently used a jQueryUI slider to allow the user to set how frequently they would like a page to refresh that they typically were sitting on sort of throughout the day, how often they would like to see the page refreshed to show them what activity has been going on. SharePoint 2010 has the auto refresh on DataView web parts and on some of the other web parts, but there's no user ability to set the length, the interval of time. So the slider is a nice way to do that. It's a nice way to let people sort of pick from a range of values. Another example is a nice date picker. This one doesn't look all that different than the SharePoint 2010 date picker, but the nice thing is with the jQueryUI date picker is you can pass in all sorts of parameters, like only allowing Monday through Friday or only allowing from today's date forward. you can change the behavior of that date picker much more easily than you can with the out-of-the-box SharePoint date picker. So you can actually, the date fields in the SharePoint forms are just input fields, so you can replace the existing date picker with the jQueryUI date picker and have a lot more control and even a little bit more visual pizzazz around how people pick dates. You could show, 4 months worth of calendar. You can show all kinds of things that the out-of-the-box date picker just doesn't let you do. So jQueryUI, these are 4 examples. It has, I think it's about a dozen different widgets, and when you use it combined with jQuery, you get a lot of these cool things that you can do and to help display your data in more interesting ways and also let people interact with your pages in nicer ways than SharePoint sometimes gives you out of the box. Number 5, plugins, 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 and this is where a lot of people know jQuery. They know it sort of the hello world of jQuery seems to be image rotators. I'm frankly a little tired of putting image rotators at the top middle of every single site that I work on the homepage, and it's often pictures of executives, and everyone knows who they are, and once you've seen them about a dozen times, you really don't need to see those pictures anymore. Or it's those strange 3 people who are always on the front page of SharePoint's team sites, pictures like that are very generic and not all that useful. And that's my editorial comment about image rotators. But there are a lot of libraries out there that do image rotators. I've used a whole bunch of them. There's Cycle, there's JShowOff. There are literally hundreds of them. It seems to be some sort of a thing that a lot of people have chosen to write. They all do things a little bit differently, but they're, again, used in concert with jQuery itself. You can add a whole bunch of plugins, and you need to think about efficiency and how you want things to work together. But you can add these plugins that are available out on the web at large, and they are, for the most part, free. And some of them work very well, some of them don't work so well, so there's a lot of caveat emptor to that. There's a jQuery plugin registry. That middle list of popular tags is just the top tag view from that jQuery plugin registry, which is on the jQuery site itself. People don't always register their plugins there, but you can see that the numbers are pretty large. And then I thought it might be something that people would be interested in. There's a thing called Metro.js that lets you build Metro-like interfaces using jQuery instead of using the Windows 8 kind of engine. So we can do it entirely with script and even with SharePoint list data driving what that script puts onto the page. So lots of plugins out there, image rotators, slideshows, charting and graphing. There's some incredibly sophisticated charting and graphing libraries out there that you can use. jplot is one very popular one. HighChart is another that I've seen a lot of people using. There are fancier animation effects that jQuery gives you. jQuery actually does give you quite a few effects, animation and effects. They're sort of thought of as separate things. jQuery gives you a bunch itself, but when you want some sort of more sophisticated things than what jQuery can provide you, there are a lot of plugins out there to do some of that really snazzy animation stuff that you see on, especially a lot of the public sort of more marketing-based sites out there. You can do any of the stuff that you see on those sites in SharePoint. You just have to figure out how it fits into the scaffolding that SharePoint provides. Number 4, improve form interactions. This is sort of one of my favorite things, and what I've spent a lot of time working on in my SP services library. Things like cascading drop-downs. If you pick a country and a region, then you only see the states that belong in that country's region. If you pick a product code or a product name, you see a picture of that product, so you have a visual, a quick visual cue that shows you what it is you've just chosen. Really making SharePoint's forms a lot more powerful. And it's a classic example of garbage in, garbage out. Anyone who's seen me talk about this stuff before knows that I get quite passionate about the fact that the form is really sort of where the rubber meets the road. It's where the user interacts with the system to get their data in. And you want that process to be as easy as possible, or else you get a lot of really crappy metadata that leads to bad search results and bad information retrieval, and it sort of reduces the whole effectiveness of the SharePoint package in general. Another thing you can do with form interactions is update lists at the same time. SharePoint's forms only allow you to update one single list in one form, but you can add things like parent and child relationships using jQuery to write into the child list or other reference lists. You can really come up with all sorts of more complex forms that you could do a tabbed interface on a form. You could do a expand collapse, a lot like the accordion that I showed you in one of the other slides. You can do a lot with the forms that make them a lot more painless and, in fact, sometimes even fun, and fun makes for better data. I'll stand by that any day. Number 3, reduce the number of postbacks. I don't have a snazzy picture for this one. SharePoint 2010, certainly 2007, and even to some degree SharePoint 2013 still uses postbacks in a lot of places where people just don't expect that to be going on in the modern web anymore. To me, a postback is a very clunky experience. What you're interacting with sort of goes away and then comes back to the browser. You're really having a conversation there with the server more than you're having a conversation with the page that's in your browser. When you're using Ajax, which is one of jQuery's really nice under-the-cover sort of plumbing functions, you can write to SharePoint's underlying lists and libraries using my SP Services library, or you can also use the SharePoint object model. Either way, on the client side, to write to the underlying constructs and really make your pages much more interactive without sending the whole page off to the server. I say satisfy the Facebook generation. I only say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek because we've got consumer products out there all over the place that are showing people cutting-edge user interfaces all the time. The user experience is just far better than what it is in SharePoint, and we can't just sit still and say, well, that's the way SharePoint works, so you're just going to have to suck it up. We have to really start thinking about how we can compete with some of those consumer interfaces and learn from them and build on them so that our users like the product that we're delivering to them a lot better, and therefore will be more willing to use it. Improve the out-of-the-box user interface. There are some things that SharePoint just does in very strange ways. The whole interaction around workflows to me is a UX nightmare. Just finding out how you're doing in a particular workflow is a whole bunch of clicks. They don't also always make a lot of sense to anyone who isn't a techie, and we can improve on that quite a bit by using jQuery as the underlying sort of engine. Here's an example, and I have a blog post about this. The link's at the bottom. An example of showing a bunch of tasks that are assigned to someone. And you can see in the red box on the right, we show the sort of standard workflow status column with a little question mark that we've added with script. And rather than clicking on it and going off into the workflow status page sort of la-la land, we can pop up with a jQueryUI dialog. We can pop up a nice little window that shows exactly how we're doing on the workflows for that particular list item, whether it's a task or any other. Actually, I'm sorry, in this case, these are documents that have tasks associated with them. So if you think about having a document that's got 3 tasks associated with it and wanting to understand how you can check on the status of those 3 tasks, the number of clicks just to get to each one of them is really pretty horrific. By putting something together like I did here in sort of a demo situation, we were able to pull up all of the information, all of the details for the tasks that this particular document had going for it in one nice little window and let you see exactly what's going on. And finally, number 1, create interactive applications. This is a screenshot from something that I built for an actual client, and I've demoed for quite a long time on the sort of the talk circuit. And it shows that you can build some things that a lot of people would say, well, just use InfoPath for this, and sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not. There are a lot of reasons why people do or don't use InfoPath, but you can use jQuery as one of your building blocks to build really sophisticated applications. whether they're sort of wizard-based things or, in this case, something that looks a lot like a spreadsheet and does recalculations as people are entering data as they move through. This was actually a budgeting exercise. You can really, maybe it's going back a little bit old school, but I'm a little old and I went to school. But you can do some programming that will let you build some really rich functionality with jQuery as your tool. It's a lot fewer lines of code than JavaScript itself. jQuery gives you a lot of shortcuts. It lets you select things on the page a lot faster and interact with them and add effects and things like that. So you can really think about it as an application development tool without having to deploy anything to the server, which in many cases is preferable. So that's number one, and they went from, again, sort of the simplest to the most complicated, and that's my list. I'm sure that all of you have some that you think I missed, and I may have covered some things that you hadn't thought of, hopefully. So, Steve, are you still there?
I am. Thanks, cool. Mark. I appreciate it. That was great and right on time. I do have some questions. Definitely want to be able to post the slide deck. There's a lot of people asking for it, so we'll make sure we get that posted alongside the recording. It'll be later today, probably tomorrow. But one of the questions, Mark, is one of the questions I have, and I guess I forgot to mention this in your introduction, but I wonder if you could talk quickly about, give everybody an overview of what SP Services is,
sure,
and how it fits in with jQuery.
Sure. I mean, SP Services is a library that I built using jQuery that helps interact with SharePoint SOAP web services. So they're the, they'll say old school again, they're the old school web services, the XML web services. They're sort of out of favor now. They're deprecated in 2013, but they're still there. And then there are a bunch of value-added functions that some of which were in these slides that allow you to add functionality without really writing any code. You just sort of drop some script with some options set into either a content editor web part, or you drop it into a page using SharePoint Designer. So it's a way to interact with SharePoint's lists and libraries that is a bit different than the client-side object model that SharePoint provides you. Some people think it's a lot simpler. Some people think it's a little more rudimentary, but it gets the job done.
Great. Yeah,
I can talk about that all day.
Right. I apologize for skipping over that because I think that, and it's a tremendously popular.
No problem.
Component that a lot of people use in their SharePoint environments. All right, so let me get through a bunch of questions here, Mark. In your opinion, where is the best place to put the jQuery and SP Services files, a library or a layout folder?
There's a lot of debate on that, and of course the answer is it depends. That's the answer to everything, isn't it? I think it's got to be part of your governance, and if you're more than a one developer shop, you need to have some governance around application or around development principles. To me, the most important thing is to be consistent. So if one person is pointing to something that's in layouts and another person is pointing to something that's in a library, then you're not being consistent. From an efficiency standpoint, from a speed of download kind of standpoint, I can't find any difference whatsoever. So these files are cached, whether they're in a library or in the layouts folder. So there's not a huge benefit of either location. I think the other thing is what's the content management scenario around those files? If it's only developers and you want to tightly control it, then maybe layouts make sense. If it's something that you want, your power users to be able to control a little bit, then a library may make more sense.
Great. Next question is, this gentleman works in a sandbox solution, so he doesn't have access to master pages, etc. How do you go about integrating jQuery into individual input forms?
Well, you can do anything you can do something as simple as adding a content editor web part into a form. There are some tricks around that. I won't go through all the details of it, but if there's my email address if this gentleman wants some tips on how to do that. So you can drop a content editor web part into one of your forms, and you would always want to use the content link to point to a separate JavaScript file, a JS file, which would contain your JavaScript and or jQuery. And that way you can sort of edit, keep the editing of the script separate from the form itself, and make changes to the script separately from the form. You can also, add your script references to page layouts. It's sort of the middle ground, right? It doesn't have to be the master page. It could be your page layouts. There could be individual pages.
Great. Next question, and this kind of goes back to the first one about the document library versus layouts, is adding the other dynamic is, do you have a recommendation for how to best call a jQuery calling the API from Google or another CDN versus loading it from your own farm?
Yep, I mean, CDNs are great because they're in the business of providing files. That's all they do. And if you point to CDNs, the links that I showed in the slide here before I went through my top 10 list, actually we're pointing at Google and CDN.js, which is a CDN that hosts other JavaScript files that aren't, not the big guys. There's Google, there's Microsoft, jQuery, the jQuery team themselves have a CDN. A lot of it depends on, what your firewall scenario is. What kind of application are you building? If it's an internet-facing site, then using a CDN makes very good sense because people are going to most likely have one or more of those locations already cached, the file from those locations already cached. If it's from an internal perspective, an intranet kind of application, then it matters less. But sometimes it's good because you can offload bandwidth requirements to these outside providers. But remember, these files are all cached. I've mentioned that already. But once you get them the first time, unless you point to a different location, you're typically not going to get the file again. So it doesn't, that sort of initial download speed only is a hit one time.
Gotcha. See, next question is, can you use jQuery for large amounts of data, like 5,000 records or more, and not affect the performance of the site?
Can I say it depends again?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a hard one.
One of the things you have to understand when you start moving some processing client side is what the lowest common denominator is on your client machines. If you're working with a bunch of people who have XP machines with a gigabyte of memory, then you're going to have a different sort of development profile than if everybody in your company is on an engineering level machine that has 16 gigabytes of memory and SSDs and all kinds of fancy stuff going on. You need to understand what that lowest common denominator is. You can process huge amounts of data client side, but you've got to get it to the client. So typically you don't want to. You're going to have to send it through the wire to the browser, and then the browser is going to have to do stuff with it while your script is running. So 5,000 is not, that number doesn't mean anything to me because it could be 5,000 digits, which would be one character each, and that's fine. If it was 5,000 entries in a contact list, then that would be a different thing. You don't want to start thinking about building everything on the client side. I think Microsoft is actually moving a little too far toward that in SharePoint 2013. You really want to put the processing that makes most sense on the server, and makes most sense on the client side. And that's part of the whole architect's skill set. You really have to understand what the right balance is there.
Okay. And this looks like the last question. This was going back to one of your slides. I want to say it was maybe 6 or 7. But we talked about the video buttons checkboxes from the DOM.
Yep.
And
that one?
Yeah, can you apply the same method to manage metadata?
Anything that's in the DOM is something that you can manipulate. I mean, everything is an XML object or element, essentially. So it depends on what you're trying to do. See, I got it depends in there again, didn't I? You can move things around in the DOM, but you have to maintain the behavior that SharePoint is expecting under the covers. So, for instance, when you have a complex drop-down, that's the kind that has a little bit of a different look, and you have to double-click the option you choose in order for it to take. If you don't understand how that all sort of binds together with the different elements in the DOM and some script that actually sort of bailing wire around it, then you can easily break those controls. But if you're literally just moving things around in the page, you're usually okay.
Okay, great. And with that, I think that was our last question. Marc, I'd like to thank you for your time this afternoon. This was great. And for everybody else, we'll see you in 2 weeks where we're going to talk about some Power View stuff in SharePoint 2013. And for those looking for the recording and the slides, those will both be posted on our website, again, either later today or sometime tomorrow. And with that, we'll conclude today's 30 on Thursday. Thanks again.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Marc.